Well, just want to recognize first and foremost that today is a special Sunday, as you've heard. It's Ordination Sunday, and we're going to hear from Reverend Dave Janssen here in just a moment. But it's my joy and privilege to introduce to you Pastor Art. Yes, can we give the Lord a hand clap for him real quick? Now, what's very interesting is many of you have also remember him because when he came, I've talked to some of you and said, yeah, Pastor Art Warner's coming. And someone says, turtle on a fence post. They remember that teaching. So Pastor Art Warner and his wife Ida especially have loved on Grace and me. Pastor Art officiated our wedding. Pastor Art dedicated all our children. And so he drove all the way down from Massachusetts. And he and Ida, his wife, really invested in Grace and I. They're like spiritual parents to us. So just want to invite him up to say a few words. Come on up, Pastor Art. Love you.
Thank you, Sonny.
Oh wait, you know what I love telling people too? He was going to Nyack College when the Tappan Zee Bridge was being built. Yeah, that's right.
He just stole one of my stories.
It's okay, you got one.
I appreciated your introduction. The life is really a lot of sort of mundane things. You keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Every so often, God punctuates it with something special. And by that experience or experiences, you sort of hang on to it. You look back. You anticipate the future. Part of that was almost 30 years ago. One of the Alliance seminary professors took a group of seminarians to Jerusalem. I went along. I was the eldest in the crowd, obviously. In Jerusalem, he asked me to give a devotion. And I'm saying, what am I going to say to these? I didn't go to seminary. I wasn't that smart. I got out of high school with C's and D's and a little cheating, and Nyack let me in on academic probation, and I didn't even know what that was. But I wrote out a statement. The call is the instrument of God whereby he holds me while he changes me, and in the process uses me. I shared that devotional. I held on to that. Well, no, it held on to me. Through 42 years of full-time ministry with Ida, and as Tom mentioned yesterday, I'm driving over the new Tappan Zee Bridge. I'm riding along, my phone is in the clip, I pull it off, and I snap a picture. Because I went over, I watched them build the first one. Matter of fact, the day it opened, Ida and I drove across from Nyack side to the other side because it was free that day until 5 o'clock. And I didn't have 50 cents. I did a U-turn and came back before they caught me. But we got out of Nyack, pastored 4 years in St. Joseph, Missouri, 8 years in Des Moines, Iowa, and then God opened a circumstance and a variety of things to bring us to Foxborough, Massachusetts. You ever hear of the Patriots? Yeah. After 30 years there, I was 68. My youth pastor was leaving, and I thought I should not stay to bring another man in and then me get old and quit. So I quit. Then I didn't know what to do. And then I found out I was still too young to quit. So the superintendent sent me to a church in Maine, divided. Do you ever hear of the song, a feudin', a fussin', and a fightin'? That's what they were doing. And in 13 months, God led us to turn it around. Then I was asked to come to Greenfield, Mass, which I'd never been out there in the far country. Went there to help out. I was there 7 months. Superintendent calls me again and says the pastor in Amherst had to leave. And I've asked your senior pastor, can I borrow you for 6 months? It turned out to be 8. And we met Tom and Grace, young whippersnappers, playing the guitar, playing the violin, and we sort of latched onto them. Frankly, it was like going to the mission field with all the different people back then. I was thrilled with that whole thing. So Tom and Grace decided they wanted to get married. There were a few understandings and restrictions, and finally, they got permission. This morning, when I'm with the Maybes, I show them the picture of part of the wedding. And in the wedding ceremony, my wife is singing the Lord's Prayer. What a heritage. I stood over there beside Grace and started to cry. How much Ida would have loved to have been here. But I don't think she'd want to leave heaven even for this. But I've had the privilege, along with Ida, of mentoring, caring, planting seeds, and watching Tom and Grace grow, seeing them leave Greenfield, go to southern New Jersey, come here. They didn't know whether they could afford them or not. I'm not sure whether you can yet. And usually, when guys get ordained, it's 2 or 3 years after you start in. Is that about right? There's some people that are slow. Amen. But the call is the instrument of God, whereby he holds me while he changes me, and in the process uses me. My life is a testimony of that. I'm 87, still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. Tom and Grace are a little younger, and you can see what God's doing. And I'm so grateful to be a part of the process. Thank you, too.
Isn't it exciting to see that journey that Pastor Art talked about in regard to those moments which are significant because we all are being held by him and yet being changed. One of the things about when you get together and the Lord's presence is there, you kind of look at how things weave together. And there are little themes that are already weaving together. And I think if you reach out and grasp it, you'll see, and I don't think we've even got there yet to what it's all going to be. But I'm noticing this animal thing going on, this tortoise on a fence post. I didn't get to hear that, but I have to admit, I'm still stuck on that parrot story. And the chicken was delicious. But it reminded me in the journey, Pastor Art, my wife and I, we were like young church planters in this place, Champaign, Illinois, where University of Illinois was. And if you're in church planting, you have like 14 people. You can visit your whole congregation in a day when you're starting out. But we had like 100% success rate in this thing called prayer meeting. Everybody came Wednesday night. Well, we didn't have a parrot, but we had a cockatiel. And this cockatiel wasn't a chicken, but we taught it to whistle. He was a great whistler. And so, some of the things we taught at the Illinois fight song, "We're faithful to you, Illinois." And, we couldn't teach it to Penn State when we were in, at that time, Big Ten territory out there in the Midwest. And he really knew the microwave really well, so you don't know when your coffee was ready. The police whistles going up and down the busy street. And I taught him a few other things. And so one night we were going to have prayer meeting over at our house. So we had like 14 people, some very distinguished missionaries. Everybody was there. And it was one of those moments in that prayer meeting where there was like a holy hush. And we all dropped into that holy hush and embraced that moment. And suddenly, our cockatiel opened up with, "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side," which was one of these songs, and everybody was really serious. And then one by one, it was, And finally, everybody broke out laughing. But it was something I have never forgotten because it couldn't have been timed more beautifully. So unfortunately, that parrot we heard about that got eaten never got a chance to share the gospel verses. But animals do have impact on us. And I'm going to share in a few moments about an animal. And it hasn't been mentioned yet. But we're here today because of Tom and actually because of the Lord. Amen. And the journey that we have seen in this couple and their family. And we're here as a church to affirm God's call upon your lives. And Tom, I know that you had a very unique salvation experience where very clearly the Lord broke in at that moment and convinced you in an instant of time that you were His. And you gave your life to Him. And since that time in church, I want you to know that this ordination process is no simple thing. 2-hour exam on the Bible, please get a great grade on that. Papers, interviews, the church has to affirm this. The elders here affirm this. The district affirms this. And they have this meeting that's like 2.5 hours where they look for anything that they can find, any little nuance, and could find none. Tom did a huge amount of work. And because of that today, we are all here because that's not just work for work, but it's your next steps in seeking God in a very real way. When I read the word, it's interesting. There's so many little tensions in there. And one of them is that we're called to sort of be little children. But on the other hand, there was a point where Paul said, there was a time in my life when I was young, and it was kind of like those child things were important, but then I became an adult. I became a man. And I wonder in terms of ordination, I don't ever want you to lose that childlike beauty and faith and joy of life. But right now, ordination is literally the highest affirmation in terms of the local church for God's call on your life. And God is using you in this community, Tom. It's a beautiful thing. And I just represent the entire alliance and the district and all of those pastors and wives that are here. And if they could all be squished into this room around the world, they would be saying, yeah, Tom. But I get to have that honor to be able to be here and represent all of them. And I'm sure Pastor and others that are here would be doing the same. When I was a little kid, well, I wasn't a little kid, I was in college, but I was still a little kid because I'm not that tall. But when I was there one time in England, I was 19 years of age, and I was walking, I was at a youth hostel, I was touring Europe, and I wasn't yet a believer, Pastor Art. The next year I would come to Christ. But I remember going for the first time in my life, I was walking down this country road. We didn't have country roads in New York where I grew up. So I was at a country road, and there was a pasture with maybe 200 sheep there. And I said, this is an opportunity. And so I thought I'd connect with those sheep. And so I went to the fence and I gave them, which I'm not going to do today, my best sheep impersonation. And guess what? It didn't impress any of them. In fact, they didn't look up. They didn't have one of those 200 say, that was weird. They just kept doing what they're doing because they knew I was not their shepherd. They knew they had never seen me before, and they weren't going to fall for it. Sheep somehow know when a shepherd's kind of around. Am I right? And when I look at Scripture, when I look at what Paul, as he followed the Lord, when I look at Peter as he followed the Lord, when I look at Jesus, how he ministered, there was this time in which he was connecting with Peter at a little charcoal, outdoor, little camping dinner type of a thing. And Jesus said to Peter, he asked him a couple questions. He said, Peter, do you love me? Because of course I love you. And what did he say? He said, feed my sheep. And then he asked him a second time, and he said, feed my sheep. And we hear that the Lord called Peter to not be the Lord, the good shepherd, but to take on that mantle of expressing to others the love and the shepherding heart of the Father. And Tom, if I could share anything with you today that would help us and guide us together, For each of us, literally in this room in leadership, wherever we are, the world today needs to see men and women who reflect at some level the shepherding heart of God. One of the things I appreciate about Pastor Art's message, he holds me while he changes me. And the beautiful thing is we're all being changed. I'm being changed. We're all being changed. And being changed means that we're not going to do things perfectly. Jesus is the good shepherd. It's kind of like we're hunks of glass. And somehow he melts us and he gets us to a place where, like a prism, we can reflect that invisible light that's passed through very common glass into a spectrum of colors, maybe the fruit of the Spirit, that can only be seen when that glass gets to a certain place where it reflects Jesus and not itself. We don't have a lot to reflect about in regard to who we are. But if we allow ourselves to be molded in such a way, wherever we are, whatever leadership we have, we can find light passing through and finding it a beautiful spectrum that people can actually see and know that the Lord is good. And so I want to take you back to another animal. It's not a parrot. It's not a turtle. But back so many years ago, this shepherd named David, he just called out and he said these things. I want to very quickly go through these. And I know we know this psalm, but let's just be reacquainted and look at it in regard to leadership for each of our lives, especially for Tom and for the church. The Lord is my shepherd, David said. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you're with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The world in which we live in is so filled with things that can rip the souls of our lives wherever we are and shred it. Whether it's in the office, or it's on the New Jersey highways, or wherever you are, there is enough to shred the human soul. And in the midst of that, we know from the Old Covenant that God had challenged the priests to be shepherds. We know that Jesus looked at Jerusalem and called it to be a place that needed a shepherd. We hear that he spoke to Peter and said, "Feed my sheep." And no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we influence people. Am I right? And in this very same way, this church influences people, and other churches influence people. And Tom and the staff and the elders and the men and the women here, we influence. And what do we influence? I want to share with you at least my heart, that people don't need to see another CEO for me if I'm in ministry. People don't need to see another professional this or professional that. But I think what gets people's attention is when they see something of the reflection of the shepherd heart of God. Those sheep didn't respond to me in England because they knew I wasn't a shepherd. They had never seen me before. I wasn't with them. I didn't feed them. They had no relationship with me. And so no matter how I tried to be with the best of my impersonations, it was known as just not being real. And today people are looking for authenticity. And when they see it, they know it.